he's got free lunch, right? That's what we're dealing with.
Well, the aim is the same.
Well, good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. My name's John Ford. I am the Director of the Planning and Building Department. Also here tonight is Bob Bronco, who is the Deputy Director of Public Works, responsible for the Land Use Division, and Steve Lazar, who is a Senior Planner, who is the primary planner assigned to working on the Cannabis Ordinance. We also have Supervisor Estelle Fennell and Bob Morris, the Chairman of the Planning Commission. We have Planning Commissioners Kevin McKinney and Alan Bonjo also here to sit with us and observe what's going on tonight. Before we get into it, I think Supervisor Fennell would like to say a couple words.
Thank you, Director Ford. I just want to say welcome to everybody. We had a very good turnout at the last meeting. We'll see how this one turns out, but already I'm seeing, and I'm very happy to see the room already half full. Anybody who's been paying attention to the process will know that our last meeting was actually very, very productive, and the Planning Commission discussed some of the things that were discussed here at their latest meeting. I want to thank the Humboldt County Growers Alliance, who are helping pay for these events, and I really appreciate them stepping up. It makes it more possible for us to come out here into Southern Humboldt to hear your feedback. I'm going to basically let staff take care of this. I'll probably jump in just because I can't help myself, but I do want to say a very big thank you to the chair of the Planning Commission, is Bob Morris, and Kevin McKinney and Alan Bonjo, who are also planning commissioners. Last week, you remember, Noah Levy was here. I think it shows a great deal of how dedicated they are to getting this right. They would come down here this evening just to hear what you guys have to say. They won't really be participating, but they will take that. And thank you for that too. They'll take that, they'll be informed as they make their decisions. So thank you guys very much. And with that, I'd like to give the mic over just for a minute to Chair Morris.
Thank you, Supervisor. Now, just so that everyone kind of understands. Is better? Okay. Just so that everyone understands the kind of the role on where we're at in this, just so that it's clear and everyone understands the role of the Commission and where we're at in the procedure here, is the Planning Commission is going to eventually make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors based on the initial draft ordinance and any changes or modifications that through the public process we feel that need to be addressed, and maybe they weren't properly addressed, or there's some language problems with the draft language. And so tonight we're here just to hear and collect information. The staff will actually make the presentation, it's been my experience based on last meeting that we hear a whole different tone down here in Southern Humboldt than we do here in Eureka. And so I'm glad to be here, and we will take your comments and issues back to the main board, commissioners, and we will make that known. So thank you.
Thank you. So before we get into what we want to talk about, I do want to just have a moment of housekeeping and give you an update on the progress that we're making with the ordinance and what we're doing at the Planning Commission level. So at the last Planning Commission meeting on, actually the date slips my mind right now, but it was earlier this month. It was on the 12th. Well, today's the 12th. So it was last week. It was the 10th, thank you. Or the 5th. Okay, it's the 5th. So on October 5th, the Planning Commission met and continued the workshop on the cannabis ordinance. At that time, the commission decided that they really wanted to continue in the workshop format. I got back to the office the next day and tried to stop the legal notice from appearing in the paper and couldn't. So one of the things that has happened is that there was a legal notice published in the paper saying we're going to have a public hearing on the 19th. We are continuing the public hearing on the 19th, and it states that in the staff report and on the agenda. So we're not going to, if we open the public hearing, it's only to continue the public hearing for the cannabis ordinance to November 2nd. The Planning Commission is going to continue the workshop on October 19th. There won't be a public hearing. What that means, for those of you that are concerned about what the difference is that the Planning Commission will not take any formal action on October 19th. The public hearing will be opened on November 2nd. That would be the earliest date that they could possibly take a public or an action on the ordinance. So I hope that's clear. If there's any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer them. Seeing none, I'm going to bring up one thing that will be on the agenda, which is a modification to the existing ordinance that does two things. Item number one is that it basically will say that the existing commercial medical marijuana land use ordinance applies to adult use, recreational use. And so, and then the ordinance is going to do something else also, is it's going to allow the issuance of interim permits to existing growers who were deemed complete before July 14th, 2017. So some of you expressed concern that we were not addressing the concerns of existing growers enough. And we heard you. We hope that part of what this does is it demonstrates that, you know, we are going to do everything that we can to help the existing growers move through the process. What this does is it doesn't really change anything. It doesn't give any new entitlement. Other than it will allow those existing growers that want to take advantage of this to be able to apply for a state license when that opens, either in November or December of this year, and then the state starts issuing licenses in January. Any questions on that?
Yes.
Yeah. If you have questions, could you come on up to the mic so everybody could hear you?
You can turn that one on.
So if you, sorry, thank you for coming. I'm Willie Grover. So if you had completed your permit just after that period, would there be any sort of, would you also allow for a permit as well for that so we could apply for a state license?
So let me talk, thank you, Willie, for asking that question. So what we're trying to do here is address the January 30th promise that I made, which was that any application that was deemed complete by June 30th, we would process those to completion by January 1st. We worked with a couple people. The July 14th date is not arbitrary. What that does is recognizes that some of the folks we were working with really didn't get their stuff in. They had talked to us, they'd been working with us up to through June 30th. So the July 14th date is really taking into account the compromises we've already made to the June 30th date. So there won't be compromises beyond that, just because if we do, there will be forever compromises. We are also, at the same time, continuing to process permits as fast as we can. And so we're not going to stop issuing zoning clearance certificates, we're not going to stop approving special permits, and we're not going to stop taking CUPs forward to the Planning Commission. If you have questions about where you fit into that, see me and I'll get you an answer.
Okay.
Yeah, Bob.
Here. My question is, do we have a count on how many permits have been issued in Humboldt County today?
82.
82. Great, thank you. I appreciate that. And also, today, the state, you know, you're talking about extending this.
Move into it, talk to it.
Today, the state of California held a workshop on their new regulations down in, I think it was Riverside. They're holding one in San Diego tomorrow, and then one in Sacramento. They've chosen, I think, to ignore us up here, and I'm just requesting that everyone here, any authority, in the planning department, supervisors, please call them and ask them, request that they have a meeting up here in Humboldt County, because there was lines around the building. It was on YouTube, or not YouTube, but Facebook today, and there was lines of people around the building trying to get into this, and they were rejected. There was people turned away because there's so many people at the meeting today, and and it's about the newest state regulations that they've revised and revised and revised. So please contact them.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks.
Hi, Tom Grover. I'd really like to thank you guys for not only coming down here to Planning Commission and supervisors and everything, but also Mr. Ford. I thought that your condensation of what we had said was really wonderful, and we're not used to that down here. It was refreshing to see these issues being dealt with in a very succinct way, because sometimes we kind of wander on. Did you get I sent to the Planning Commission a definition of rainwater? Did anybody get that? You put this input in, and I don't know, Mr. Morris, you didn't get my definition of rain? All right, I'll go back through processes and ask them. Thank you so much for talking about houses and the permits for the house. You also have a thing in there that I brought up about not having other permits. In other words, you couldn't get a building permit, or you couldn't get a grading thing while you had a permit in place. And I think this is just too general. I think you need to be specific. Let me give an example. My family would like to build a building, commercial building, that we can rent out. And one of the occupants would be a cannabis operation, the other are housing units. But we go into the planning department and they say, well, you can't have any permits. And so I think of myself as being a rural landowner. Does that mean I can't fix the erosion or put in a culvert because I have a cannabis operation? And I find it's really not specific enough. And it leaves it open, and the planning department's going, well, you can't go anywhere with your permit until your cannabis permit is done. Also, the area of figuring out how much cannabis you have for a greenhouse, I think this is very, very succinct. You just measure the outside. For individual plants, you get into this width of the pads. The water board pass their numbers as to how many square feet you have based on erosional components, which are not really part of what the tax should be based on. So you should have a different computation for individual plants. I wish I maybe hit some of these issues at the last planning commission, but unfortunately Access Humboldt's thing, I got 3/4 through and then it died. So
One of the things we would like to do is go through some of the ordinance tonight, so we can address maybe some of these.
so much later?
Yep.
Okay.
I was just trying to do a little bit of housekeeping right now.
Yes.
So could I ask that, do you have questions on what I just said? And if you don't, could we move into like introducing some of this tonight?
Hi, Cecilia Landman. I'm asking, I think housekeeping. I looked at the EIR on the web today and went to section 6, which was supposed to be where the alternatives are, and there were none. So I'm wondering if you could explain how much time there is to comment on the ordinance as well as the EIR. Because last week you said there were alternatives, but I didn't see any that were on the web.
We will check that. They should be there. They are part of the EIR. I apologize.
Unless I was looking at the wrong one, it said none under section 6?
No, there are definitely alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And when is the time frame for
The
comment?
time frame for comment ends on October 16th.
Thank you very much.
So the three things that we want to do tonight is to just go back and give a quick summary of what we heard in the first workshop. And then we have developed some thoughts in terms of presenting to you some ideas that we have that we hope will begin to address some of the concerns that the group had expressed at the last meeting. So we'd like to spend a little bit of time doing that. We'd like to walk through some of the bigger issues relative to the ordinance, and then, time permitting, we want to walk through the various sections of the ordinance with you. Is that a worthwhile goal for tonight? Okay.
Do you have an opportunity for people to speak to issues that are not
Yes, please go ahead and go to the mic and we will address that now.
Thank you. I'll take the opportunity because he's making his way across there. I'm Michael McCaskill, and I'm a community member, and I would like to say I haven't been satisfied with how the things have gone and so far, and my community in Miranda has been absolutely destroyed. Some are legal, some are illegal, and I would strongly recommend that you not issue any more licenses or open up a period for more licenses until you have come to grips with what we have already, and especially to be sure that people who have made giant clear cuts and created very large scenes this year are unable to continue in the future and are unable to be loopholed in and grandfathered in. The second thing I would like to say is I do think that there should be room for more people to participate in the industry, but that I recommend it be something like the Mendocino 25 plant limit, where you would buy a bracelet and anyone who's not on your GIS system as one of your cannabis farms, that there could be a 25 plant per parcel or less for smaller parcels per inhabitant, where you would, or per parcel, where you would be able to grow a small number of plants on a parcel, because the economy has been really hurt, I think, by a lot of outside money coming in and local people who are unable to supplement their income. And the third item, along the lines of enabling small local producers to be able to survive in the current market, is that the county needs to have some sort of distribution system where legal licensed buyers can come and purchase marijuana from legal Humboldt grown people, so that you can have control of the appellations and you could do your testing there. And especially I've heard that there's going to be $400 per pound toxin test or pesticide test, that if the county was able to do that in-house in your facility, not entirely unlike how the tobacco industry deals with open outcall bidding for individual lots, that the county could do a lot of service for the people to have their own in-house testing and make that just at the cost that it is for the county of people. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Okay, let's see if this thing works.
It's working.
Hey, can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Robert Sutherland and I'm from Humboldt. We have submitted written comments and I thank you for giving attention to them. Here's another issue, usually not discussed, but no doubt lurking in all our minds. We've seen the fires. They're getting much worse, as Forest Service and CAL FIRE figures both prove. Most people now have the strong feeling this is global warming. We will have those big fires here. Let's look at the future. Do we want to be inviting industry and residents into our forest lands? What are the risks? Aren't we just increasing those risks in the face of the inevitable? Humboldt County is a magnet for marijuana growing. Part of the reason for that is the sheriff's office has not always been ethical. This has helped to spread the rumor that Humboldt is outlaw friendly, and now we are dealing with the crowding and the damage. It is possible for you to deal with the overcrowding through the permitting process. I recommend that you avoid accepting new permits and expansions until all the present ones are processed. Also, I would like to see you redirect the heavy cost burden onto those commercial growers that do not apply for permits. There needs to be a much better economic balance so that legal growers are not subsidizing the outlaws. There are ways, these are some of the ways you can in effect bring about enforcement. Please take the zoning laws seriously. Presently, large areas are being transformed into industrial zones through a piecemeal process. For example, there is no legal authority to be protecting some forest lands and not others. The commercial use of generators is no less destructive and dangerous in lands zoned forest recreation than in lands zoned TPC. So why ban them from one but not the other? All these forests have threatened species of wildlife, and all are equally vulnerable to fatal wildfires. Please consider the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello, and thanks for your time again coming down here. I believe it was about 4 days ago, Lori Ajax had given a live broadcast touching on track and trace on a state level. So basically, I'm going to read a little quote here. On January 1st, there will be no room for the black market. January 1st, 2018, the state of California cannabis seed to sale system will go live. And those with licenses from their local municipalities will be required to participate. You must have a license from your local municipality first before you can get one from the state, as we knew. So January 1st, any company operating in the state of California who does not have a license issued by their locality will be forced to shut down and reapply, then apply for state licensing, which could take up to 1 to 2 years. So I'm not sure what you guys know about what's happening on the state level with track and trace and how that's going to affect the permitting process here in Humboldt County. But I really support the fact that you are opening up the conversation for temporary licenses. And I really think that should be something that's focused on aggressively. And maybe specifically the cutoff date, the July 14th date, maybe being open for negotiation on that, and working with more of those 1,800 applicants that did in fact get their complete applications in. Doing so is really going to give Humboldt County an edge in the marketplace on a state level come January 1st. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Ayana Gregori. I grew up here. There's one issue that I haven't heard anybody mention. One of the articles I read was saying that the timber prices were luckily staying up at the same rate the cannabis land was. Wow, what a relief, right? Not really. Because when I was little, I heard stories from a lot of these people here actually about the terrible clear cuts of the 60s. And I saw the results myself. My dad just won a 30-year award for restoration. So it's pretty obvious. I also very clearly remember how my neighbors would actually clear cut their land. It was very common before anybody could grow weed. So I do want to put that on the floor here, because unless I actually don't remember correctly, Forest Forever initiative failed, unfortunately. So our forests aren't saved, and our laws aren't very good either, with all respect, please. So that's definitely a huge danger. It's far light years more impactful than any type of tourism that we're going to be able to develop, especially at these prices, for the next at least couple years. The other thing is, this is really important. So, what are we really doing? First of all, I'm very glad about the temporary licenses. I hope it's actually being done in a way that you're considering our economy, because I have all this enthusiasm to do all this work, but I look in my checkbook and it's just not happening. I mean, we need a little bit more time to adjust. The other thing is, when you make laws, one way is to actually make rules against something, and the other way is to make structures that passively promote what you want. And I think that if we really want Humboldt County to be a stable place, I think it would be a very big mistake not to put some very, very serious, even more almost emergency serious time into that subject. Because what is happening about the population control, like I said last meeting, the people who are leaving aren't just any people. They're the saviors of Northern California. The people who are getting kicked out of this are the ones who actually deserve to be here in the first place. That's another thing. The last issue is that we should really look at what we want to create here. Because if we allow energy to just move in structures that aren't designed to create what we want, it just makes what it always made in the past. We've seen that, haven't we? I think we have. And I really know you guys are really trying hard. I see it. I don't care what anybody else says. I can tell that. I don't even need to meet you. I can see how hard you guys are working. This is a very delicate situation. So anything that you can do to, in a very gentle way for both sides, bridge the gap, that's what we need. We need to bridge the gap. We're all, running here like in the movies. Or you got a car, you get it running, or there's a horse. They're running away from the white men. They run across that huge gap across the Grand Canyon. That's what we're looking at right now. It's pretty scary, I'll tell you that much. There's some people who already got their wings going and stuff, but even they're ooh, what's going on here? You know what I mean? I'm starting to be a little theatrical, but it's too heavy. So thank you, and this is way more important than all the details, because the root of a problem is the structure. So
Thanks, Lynn.
thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Al, Supervisor, and I want to thank Director Ford for considering about the people whose houses are not up to code for small grows. But also I would like to bring up this point that Robert Sutherland somewhat brought up, or did bring up, and mine is that I signed up for compliance, and this magazine started coming to my house, to my address on the side of the road. It's a big glossy magazine called Marijuana Venture. And the last issue I got says California's best places to grow. And it shows Humboldt County. Then on last Friday I got the Times Standard, and it had this little paper in it, Humboldt North Coast Homes. So there are 3 places in here for sale that say that are turnkey marijuana plantations. And the first one starts at $1 million. The second one is $1,400,000, and the third one is $1,999,000. 900. Yeah. So it's like, we can't do this. It's not right. So please, if that's what's going on, can the people who already turned in their forms and for permits, can they get processed before new ones get processed? Because I feel like maybe this is like getting out of control. And a lot of people signed up because they thought that maybe they were saving themselves and that they asked small people to come forward. And I think that what Bonnie Blackberry said last week about no grows larger than 3,000 square feet is very, very smart. Thank you. And thank you for coming here.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Eileen. I was here because I've never been to one of these before, and I've been here for a lot of years. And I wanted to thank all of the fire workers, all of the medevac guys for saving our land. The Caltrans workers, okay, you're not just like the punchline of my jokes anymore. You actually got up there on Bell Springs and you're doing it. Go guys, keep up the good work. But I was wondering, is there a way, or you're gonna have a meeting about weight limits on that road? Because that road is not meant to have semi trucks full of dirt pulling a trailer full of dirt or fertilizer, and then two more following them like a convoy. All right, and I've put up with that I didn't drive for 10 years. Well, they're getting took out on my road, but I just wanted to say thank you. And if there's, like, can we bring that up, like in another meeting, a weight issue? Like, that those roads aren't made, they're fixing it, okay? It only took me, I think, I bought my car in February of something. It'll be 2 years in February. And I've called once or twice a week since I bought that car. So, go guys, and I know you're understaffed and underfunded, but I don't think the road is like built thick enough to carry that kind of weight load constantly. And it is all day long come summertime. Well, actually, it never quits now. Because you got your indoors, you got your depth, you got all of that. Okay, if you want to bust me for this one, I don't have a 215, but 5 CBD plants, okay? Anyways, peace. And I didn't want to just bitch it. I wanted to say thank you from my heart. You guys really, truly did save us.
John, do you want me to speak to you?
Good evening, my name is Paul Hagan. I'm an environmental lawyer. I'm based in Arcata. I'm an environmental attorney, really a regulatory specialist, and specialize in compliance permitting here in Humboldt County, among other things. I'm assuming that we've reached the public comment portion of the meeting and gone past the housekeeping, or what?
Actually, I'm trying to be polite and let people talk, but in all honesty, the more you talk, the less time we're going to have to present. So it's really your choice.
Okay, so we're not yet in the public comment period?
No.
So we should wait until then for public comment?
Preferably.
That's what I'll do, thank you.
With that being said, the first thing we did want to talk about tonight a little bit is that we heard you last week talk about the concern with the road standards that applied particularly to small farmers, the need to protect and incentivize and continue to preserve the viability of small farmers, that we need to tailor the size of the operation and identify potential impacts and create a threshold at which those impacts could be deemed to be acceptable. And we also clearly heard the concern with the fact that homes were not to be interlaced with permitting of the cannabis cultivations. And so we also heard the concern with limiting or prohibiting new cultivation sites clearly has been articulated tonight, and then also concern with the can of tourism. Some of the other things in here we heard is that there's a little bit of ambiguity related to permitting within on the industrial sites, and we know we need to look at that. So one of the things that we want to really talk about tonight is we have modified the language from the section that talks about the existing small farms. And do we have that available, Steve?
Which section?
This is 55.4.6.5.1. And so one of the things we want to do tonight is talk about two concepts that we've thought about. One is we want to modify this section to address some of the concerns that were brought up. And then we also have thought about differentiating some of the concerns with the roads between the impacts and perhaps the potential need for improvements and then participating in maintenance. So one of the things you'll see, this is a red line strikeout that we are going to present to the Planning Commission next Thursday night as an alternative, is to modify that section D, which actually we're going to take that section completely out.
C. We talk about C.
We're going to take B and C out. So that we heard the concern last time that if the grow site was truly small, that it wasn't going to generate a need for a lot of employees, and that there may be some need as people continue to grow older, which I know I am, and maybe I would want help one day. And so farmers would too, to not preclude the opportunity for somebody to come and help them on their farm. So we heard that. We still do want it to be a small family farm, so we left A in place, but we did take out the permitting requirement in C. And then when it comes down to the road standards, this is E. So one of the things that we were struggling with here, and this is a difficult discussion, because there are two levels of impacts here. One is the functional capacity, one is the water quality concerns associated with the road. So one of the things that we have come to think is that if you have a 3,000 square foot grow, that can be managed by people who normally live in a normally sized single family residence. In order to get a permit to put a single family residence on the site, we would not require improvements to the road. So if your level of cultivation, i.e. 3,000 square feet, that's matching up with what the state would permit, is at that level, that's at a level less than we would require improvements if you're putting the house in. So we're not going to require functional capacity improvements associated with that in this alternative. We have a struggle though. We still have an environmental concern, and that's water quality. And we don't want to get into a place where we back ourselves into a corner and have the state or somebody else come after us and say, you've identified a potential environmental impact, but you're not trying to address it. So one of the things that these are existing grows. So what we think is a reasonable solution is to not require any engineering work before the permit's issued. So there's no upfront cost to do the analysis. What this does is it creates the potential for everybody who exists on the road to come together and either do a corporate study or to do an individual study depending on the circumstance. The language here would allow that to be done within a year of the provisional approval being granted. And so you can either get together with your neighbors and develop the study and develop the improvement plan, or if you're the only one on the road, you can do that. And it may be, and we hope that it is, that there's not a lot of improvements there. You know, we just have to be able to address that. So I hope that you'll see the need there, that we are trying to really make this as as painless as possible, but there's a real need that needs to be addressed, and that's the water quality need. So then within a year, you get the plan done, and then a year after that, you'd have a year after that to do any improvements that are necessary. And so that goes along with the section for provisional improvements, the provisional approval that exists within the existing ordinance. So that's basically what we have thought about in terms of trying to restructure this as an alternative to address the existing small cultivation sites. I think, can we go back to the overhead, and Bob, would you like to talk a little bit about the difference between improvements and maintenance and what we're trying to do there?
Bob Runkle, Public Works Department. As a continuing discussion of roads, one of the topics that came up is making sure there's a clear understanding between physical improvements that are needed to the road for functional capacity versus ongoing maintenance needs of a road. So just for a moment, let's pretend that no one's applying for a permit. Everyone's living out on their property, driving up and down whatever roads they're driving up and down. If they're not a county maintained road, then it's up to all the users of that road to go ahead and perform road maintenance on it. There's provisions under civil code, I think it's section 465, that deals with the requirement of all the people using the road to financially participate in the upkeep of that road. So the obligation already exists for those people using the road to go ahead and maintain it. The challenge that often comes in with road maintenance is a different appreciation of what road maintenance should be. If you have someone that has a Porsche, they'd like a road that's as smooth as glass. If you have someone that has a monster 4x4 pick-em-up truck, they have a completely different expectation of road maintenance as they haven't seen a pothole big enough to stop them yet. Perhaps somewhere in the middle is reasonable road maintenance. And getting all the road users together to decide how they want their roads to be maintained to is something that's going to vary from road to road to road, depending upon the economics of the people that live on that road, together with their desires for what type of road they'd like to go ahead and maintain. But the need to go ahead and fund road maintenance is something that already exists without cannabis projects being brought into the picture. To help people along with that, the department does have forms to help people form road maintenance associations, to help set that framework up, to get people on board in order to allow them to successfully manage the road on their own without assistance from the government, because no one wants to hear, we're the government, we're here to help. No one wants to have to hear that. With respect to the cannabis projects, we're starting to hear from people on certain roads that the roads just aren't wide enough. There's just too much traffic. They're just not suitable for what the intended purpose is. The goal with the road evaluation form is to get to the point where an engineer is figuring out what needs to be done to the road to go ahead and make it work for all the growers that are going to be off that road, and then ultimately figure out how do we go ahead and divvy up, proportion out the responsibility to the different growers to go ahead and make that work. And that's where the slide comes in, is that, okay, we do need, some roads may need improvements. The goal is that, as John had mentioned, you have the small grow exemption. This is something that we're looking at considering. How do you exempt out the small grower from the need to widen a road, separate from water quality? This is just from the functionality of the road. Exempt out the small growers from participating in that, when you're going to be a much larger commercial grower, that's when the need for the widened road is to deal with all the additional traffic that's going to be going down the road. Then on the backside, we're going to go ahead and have road maintenance costs are going to there'll be a minor increase in road maintenance costs when you have a slightly wider or more improved facility in the long run. That cost would be shared equally amongst all the road users because everyone's benefiting from having a better road at the end. But again, the increased cost of road maintenance is relatively minor compared to the large capital cost of road improvements by themselves. And that is the general thought that we're looking at as a way to help move projects forward, separating out improvements from maintenance.
So at this time, I think one of the things we would like to do is maybe get some feedback on this as a concept. Again, if there's something we've missed, we'd be happy to hear that. If overall this is fine, I mean, applause and we'll move on would be acceptable too. So whatever you feel is most appropriate.
Like everyone else, I appreciate being here.
Turn the mic on.
Whoops. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And Mr. Ford, I want to thank you in particular for taking such appropriate action over our concerns expressed last week and really doing right by the community. I appreciate and respect that. Thank you. Just a very quick thought for your consideration on this road work is the question that I don't hear people really addressing of whether or not in 5 years or 10 years' time, many of these destructive, enormous, industrial, ridiculous factories are going to be able to survive miles off reasonable roads way back in the country competing against operations in productive agricultural valleys. If it is less than likely that a lot of these uses will continue for more than a few years as the boom busts, maybe it's not as important to focus on really short-term improvements that may leave a lasting legacy of, really cheap, rural, rustic homes with great roads going to them. I just wonder if you've thought about it. These very costly improvements for operations that really may not have much of a future. And I just wonder if you've thought about that. Thank you.
Since that was a question, I think we will respond to it. Is that has to be weighed with the potential, and we do hope that the things that we permit are successful. We don't want to go through these exercises to have anybody fail. That's not in anybody's best interest. So there is potentially a long-term impact there that has to be weighed. We can't ensure that things are permanently viable. But in the short term or the long term, we can't ignore the impact that many of you are talking about right now from these large illegal grows that are abusing the roads right now. I mean, you see the impact firsthand. And that has to be addressed for the legal grows, but then the illegal grows also have to be addressed through code enforcement. And I will say, just watch. For about 2 weeks, watch. I'm not going to make any promises that I can't deliver on now, but just please watch and see if something doesn't happen. There will be code enforcement action happening.
Okay, some more, I just wanted to clarify, were you saying that if the roads need to be widened for a large cannabis grow or grows, that all the people that use the road, whether they're growing or not, are supposed to pay for that?
Thank you, Bonnie, for asking that question. That's a good clarification. No, that is not what we're saying. We're saying that if a large, for instance, if a large cannabis grower is going in and the road's not adequate to support that use, that grow would be responsible for doing any improvements that are necessary. And can I just say that one of the things that I hope you will struggle with, as we are, is that I tend to think, as I sit up here and listen to many of you talk, that you're immediately jumping to the conclusion that every road out there is suddenly going to go to a paved Category 4 road with a centerline stripe. That's not the purpose of the analysis that we're going through, okay? We're not looking to suddenly improve roads to a paved road with a centerline stripe. All we're trying to do is make sure that the volume of traffic that's on the road does not put the public in a dangerous circumstance. So when we're asking for these road evaluation forms, that's all, maybe I should have Bob talk about this, but that's really all we're trying to get to, is that we want to make sure that we're not putting too many people on a road that can't possibly handle that number of people. It's really not about wanting to see roads improved to a different standard. I hope that's clear. And people who aren't part of the permitting process, existing residents that are living off a road, they are not obligated to make any improvements.
Okay. Something that I brought up at the last meeting, but I want to bring it up again and see what you thought of it, is people are required to join a road association, and then it's up to the road association to collect the maintenance. And I feel like if you're going to put more traffic on our roads, then there should be something when you're applying and you're renewing. A little check off is, are you paid up on your road dues? And if you're not, then it's like, well, you need to go and take care of that before we're going to give you a permit or renewal. And I think without that, joining the road association is almost meaningless, and to put the people in a situation where they have to go to court to deal with something that's been put on them by the county.
Good evening. My name is still Paul Hagan, and the rest of it's still the same. I recognize that your comment, or what you're asking for in public comment now is specifically about roads. So I'll circumscribe my remarks to that regard. As to Bob's, it's Civil Code Section 845 that you're talking about. 845, for those who want to know, it's about road maintenance, easements, and agreements, and that's what you need to build an agreement on legally. My remark to the Planning Commission and Supervisor Fennell and everyone else is that I understand what you just said, and I applaud you. One of the main things that I've been promoting is death by 1,000 cuts. The burden that's being put on the farmers are coming from a multitude of areas. We don't need to go into it. They're coming from a variety of directions, and the prices are dropping, and people are getting decapitated already. What I want to focus on is the proposal that you've made is you're trying to soften the blow financially on the road situation with the smaller people and also spread the cost into the future, kind of a cash flow thing. And I applaud that. That really, we need a lot more of that. So I really want to bring to your attention that that's much needed kind of across the board. We've got power infrastructure costs. We've got various costs that the wheat farmers are having to bear under the ordinance and other state regulations. I mean, like indoor, they have to do, it's got to be on the grid or carbon offsets. There's all kinds of infrastructural costs that are woven into the structure overall that collectively is a large burden. That's the death by 1,000 cuts issue, and the roads is only one of it. So the fact that you can focus on the one area and kind of spread the costs into the future and kind of exempt the lower level people who have the least amount of revenue, that's very, very good. And to the extent you can find other areas in the ordinance to implement the same policy, that would be wonderful. some of the other thousands of the cuts. And the second thing is, well, I'll leave it for that for when it comes up later, but I applaud you for trying to find a way to spread out costs in the future and lower them for farmers in one sector and look for other places in the ordinance to do as well. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for setting this up again. And I really appreciate the fact that you've heard some of this about the roads and are making efforts to make this, well, more possible. What I would like to see is some sort of financial analysis of what this means. Looking at your chart last time, I'm guessing that for every mile of county road, there is a mile of private road. The county spent $2 million on maintenance this year, so there's a $2 million maintenance cost. But the county is waiting for $20 million to come from the feds for storm damage. If that's really true, the storm damage to the private roads, which are much more poorly constructed, is going to be much higher. So the question I've got is, before you pass this, before you recommend this burden, that you figure out what this burden is. What are you asking these people to come up with? If you're asking them to come up with $20 or $25 million, that'll come out about $15,000 per permit on a industry that's actually on the ropes this year. If there's a way to do this, and I'm unfortunately not a government lawyer, it would be nice if the county could, in some way, take responsibility for these roads so that they could tell the feds, we want the money for storm damage to these roads as well. Because, I don't know, the county has got roads that are not class 4 roads, and that doesn't seem to be an obstacle to the county having those roads. And I doubt that anyone would mind if the county would like to assume some responsibility for the private roads. So if you can figure out a way to get the feds to kick in the 20 mil or whatever, that would be quite nice. I have a couple of comments from someone who couldn't come, who asked me to mention these points. But do you want to speak to the roads before I do these or not?
Just very quickly, because you raised something that I had not addressed in the previous presentation, which is important, and that is the county roads. And so we've been giving that some thought. And under a normal development application scheme, what would happen is that if improvements are needed to a county road, the applicant would be responsible for contributing their fair share to the improvement, which is basically their impact. And then the rest of the improvement would be the county's responsibility. And so that's really an alternative that we do need to present to the Planning Commission and to the board. Those are policy issues. And that has not gone on deaf ears. We have heard what you said. And that is an important policy issue that we will be taking forward.
I would like to distinguish between existing growers who are not expanding and growers who are expanding or coming in for new cultivation. The existing growers are not adding any burden to the road system that hasn't been there for years. They are not changing the facts on the ground. If someone comes in new or they want to expand, they're going to create more traffic. They're going to cause those incredible tractor-trailer trucks to be winding up these little private roads. Okay, fair enough. I think they should pay a portion or maybe all of the costs of bringing the roads up to the standard that would suit their business needs. But these roads are already up to the standards that suit the business needs of the existing growers. So, now, for these other points, I'm sorry, I lost the other points. Okay. This person wanted me to suggest to you that there be no property tax this year because nobody has gotten it, relatively speaking, no one has gotten their permits in time to benefit from them. I haven't seen the tax bills yet. I don't know how they're going to handle the difference between the permit size and the actual growing size either. I think that's a tangle that no one has considered how to deal with yet, but I'm willing to be surprised. And I'm certainly interested in this calm before the storm that you mentioned. The second recommendation this person had was that you extend the time to do these things, and I think you've taken some steps towards that. And I think that's a good idea, because I don't think, well, there's only so much cash you can put out at once. The third idea is there's a feeling that the state is being over-ambitious in its definition of jurisdictional waters, that they are in fact claiming waters falling into their jurisdiction which do not fall into their jurisdiction. And this is causing expenses and troubles for people. And it would be nice if the county would back up the people on the land over this jurisdictional water situation. Particularly, I think, there seems to be some confusion about what is rainwater catchment. And there's also a question of hydrologically connected wells and existing ponds. So, if you could put your thinking hats on for those, I think that would be nice. And finally, the market has somewhat collapsed, but the tax burden has not. If you could give some consideration to adjusting the tax downward to meet the economic realities of this year, that would be beneficial. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Nicole Harris, and I just had a question about the roads and the discussion that you just had. Do I understand correctly that roads of 3,000 square feet or less would be exempt from these improvement and maintenance costs?
Grows of 3,000 square feet and less would be exempted entirely from the functional capacity requirements, so that there would be no obligation to determine functional capacity or make any improvements to address functional capacity.
All right, and I'm wondering where that number came from, because as I recall in the registration form, in order to be able to apply for a permit, which was the first step in all of this process, the smallest tier or type garden that one could enroll as was 5,000 square feet. So why the small grow?
No, it's up to 5,000 square feet.
I see. And so maybe it would be logical to have the road exemption also be directed towards people who ticked box 1 and box 1A, which is 5,000 square feet or less, not 3,000 square feet.
So one of the things that we're trying to do is tie into a state license type that allows 2,500 square feet of outdoor grow and 500 square feet of indoor, which corresponds to 3,000 square feet.
Okay, great. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Linda. I live off of Salmon Creek Road, and I was just wondering, I've seen an awful lot in the last 3 years of huge grows, generators 24/7, rows and rows and rows of hoop houses, traffic, semis, water delivery trucks starting at 6:30 in the morning. I live about a half mile off of Thomas, and I can hear them as I'm making my coffee in the morning. Now that has to do with the roads, because I'm a retired government employee, so I kind of understand from your point of view what you're trying to do here, but are we too late to keep these large industrial grows out of the hills? Because I really moved up here to retire, had a peaceful, quiet, nature-filled, and now I can't take my walks. The traffic is insane out there, and the roads are horrible. And the county was just out and fixed a lot of potholes, but I've been forced off of those roads by these delivery trucks almost weekly, almost on a weekly basis. I get pushed into one of the ditches by one of these huge delivery trucks. And is it too late to not let the hills get ruined by all this industrial cultivation? And I too am at the small grow stage, very small, outdoor, no generators, no lights, and I can hardly get in and out of my place anymore.
So, Linda, one of the things I would say in response to your appropriate question is that a lot of what we're seeing right now in terms of the impacts have to do with illegal cultivation, have to do with issues that have to be addressed through a code enforcement process. The Board of Supervisors has reallocated the code enforcement function to the planning department, has allocated new positions. We've now offered jobs to 3 new people. We've got 3 new code enforcement inspectors that will be starting shortly. They have also authorized and directed staff to begin proactive enforcement, not complaint-based enforcement. So one of the things that we are doing is that, and I explained this at the last meeting, but we are looking at areas where there is a concentration of illegal growths. We are identifying those properties. We are sending those property owners notices to abate and notices of violation. The notices of violation carry with them a $10,000 a day fine per violation. Those violations can include not only the cultivation of cannabis, raiding without a permit, building structures without a permit. We are aware of the water truck and delivery issues there, and we are pursuing that. And so that's another violation for those that are trucking in water. And so some of these violators can have up to 3 or 4 different violations that they can be charged 3 or 4 violations per day, which could be $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 per day.
Can I ask you a question? I can't tell if this is on anymore.
It is now. When you get close enough to it, it is. Don't be afraid of it.
Would the county accept an application from somebody living in the hills that wanted a 20,000 square foot garden?
So, under the existing provisions, and depending on the zone, well, let me just start. Up in the hills where it's TPZ, no, we're not accepting new applications. So all of those industrial grows in TPZ that are not existing as of January 1st, 2016 are illegal. Those are code enforcement issues, pure and simple, and there is no alternative. There is no permitting path for them. They need to go away.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I'm so glad that you're trying to get into this road issue, because most of the state organizations have even given up on trying to deal with it. And it's a gnarly issue on many accounts. As part of the Ill River Recovery Project, what we're trying to work with people is best management practices, and that's what the water board, that's the buzzword everybody's using. And as much as I really don't like that that's totally ill-defined, it still is a good place to start for people that are trying to get their roads up to standards. So I just wanted you to think about that buzzword, best management practices. I think it would be helpful to the people trying to understand this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just like to say that, what's going to affect most of this is the size of the grows that you guys allow out in the hills and all of the problems that come with that. And I think the size should be rather small. 5,000 feet is a pretty reasonable number, but there really shouldn't be bigger grows than that out in the hills where the water and the roads and the community, it's not in favor of any of those things, and it has a pretty humongous effect. And yeah, these are communities out there that are no longer communities because of the huge operations that are going on out in the hills, and they just really have no place out in there. If you want to be a millionaire, you should buy some property that's meant for agriculture.
Good evening. Again, I was going to speak earlier on a second issue and took a pass on it because we were talking specifically about roads, but since Director Ford opened up the second issue, opened the door on code enforcement, I'd like to make a comment about that. Anybody who knows anything about me and my history knows that I am absolutely pro-enforcement, to say the least. Anybody who knows anything about me really knows that I'm pro-proper enforcement, to say the very least. I'm going to tell you now that your code enforcement process is out of control. You're on notice that it's arbitrary and capricious. I have seen some of the documents that come out of there. They are, I'm going to use my words carefully, appalling. I have 3 different complaints, utterly boilerplate, all 8 violations, exactly the same, for 3 different APNs. Ranging $20,000, $30,000, and $40,000, respectively, in each of the 3. The individuals who were met by people from the code enforcement unit were told it would be better not to appeal it because that would poison the well. Your staff is behaving improperly. I've seen your documents. They do not comport with proper procedure. You have a situation on your hands. I'll be addressing the board soon about it. I want things to succeed. I want the county to be able to enforce its ordinance, and I want people to be able to survive. Threats of $10,000 a day are utterly unnecessary. I was an environmental prosecutor and took people to criminal jury trial and didn't get that much out of judges after a jury trial. The thing's far worse than what the code enforcement people are looking at, and they're laying down tens of thousands of dollars with no evidence. The process is hollow from what I have seen. You have a big problem. I want you to succeed, and you better look very, very carefully at the documents you're sending out and the administrative hearing process that you decided to pay folks down in Hastings Law School to run on a video screen. People in this county are going to be faced with video enforcement from an ALJ with no evidence being given to them ahead of time when they have to make a decision to enter into a compliance agreement or go to a hearing. This is appalling. People are being threatened with tens of thousands of dollars a day. They're practically in tears when they read the letters. Now they're being roped up by people out in the field and hauled in for these hearings or not, and forced to file compliance agreements with a very short deadline of 10 days, has to be notarized. And I say again, all 8 violations on 3 different complaints that I've seen for 3 different APNs were boilerplate verbatim. There's a problem when you issue documents that accuse people of things and you don't have any evidence and they all read the same and there's exorbitant fines in there. So please, if you want this to succeed without killing the goose that laid the golden egg, to hell with 1,000 death. You're killing some of your constituents out here financially with this code enforcement process. You need to realize this. People cannot handle tens of thousands of dollars in fines, in addition to everything else, even if it's warranted, which I seriously doubt. So please take a careful look at the evidence that you are providing to the people in the process. And the process itself, when I ask questions, I'm not told that. Nobody knows when it's going to happen or how it's happening. I won't say what officials I've talked to, but nobody inside the department can tell me the guts of the process and when it's going on. So bring on the ALJ stuff, make sure your evidence and your process is together, and if you're going to ask for 10 or 20 or 90,000 bucks in fines at the hearing, you better tell people ahead of time why. Not just tell them what you're going to, but give them the evidence. Please do this correctly. Please.
All I would say, we do have evidence. We don't accuse anybody without evidence.
People are not being given the evidence. They're being forced to sign documents without any evidence given to them.
I will look into that.
Please
But,
do.
yeah.
Back to the roads. Is this on? Okay. I agree with the previous speaker. The county is allowing too large of grows out in our rural neighborhoods. And I think his suggestion that no more than 5,000 square feet is a good one. Because the bigger the grow, the bigger the impact. Plus, what we have going on now is the mixed light situation, which is a lot different than outdoor because it requires fuel for the generator noise, all the traffic, and multiple harvests. In the EIR talked about, something like a 4-week harvest season. Well, when you put 2 or 3 mixed light and an outdoor, then you're having multiple harvests throughout the summer. And not only the harvests that are happening, there's all the truckloads of supplies that are coming in for these harvests. So I think the EIR has made some mistakes, and I don't know how you're going to correct that with the multiple impacts because of the mixed light. I am totally against generator grows, and that's what these mixed light are, is generator grows. You have these regulations where you say, well, they'll only use the generator for 20% of their energy use. How on earth are you going to enforce something like that? I don't see anybody, especially when the county is now relying on the neighbors or other people to make complaints about not covering up the greenhouses and the noise from that. And in the EIR it says there's no feasible mitigation for the dust and everything from the road use. Well, there is a mitigation, smaller roads. So please, we don't need 20, 30,000. I've got in my neighborhood 18,000, 20, 30,000 foot road. And this idea that what is going on as existing is okay. The last few years, it's been increasing and increasing, and the impacts on the roads are already really, really bad. And so it isn't just new growths that are going to create a problem, it's what's going on now. And I hope the county will stop permitting such large growth out on our roads. Thanks.
You guys are doing quite a good job at looking at everything. Okay. I see there's two sides. There's the side where you're reducing impact, and there's a side where you are maintaining the flow, let's say. Because, okay, let's look at once again, what are we trying to achieve here? First of all, we are not the only ones in this. We all know that. There's another much bigger game, so we might want to, definitely want to, if we want to survive as a community with strong economics and all the rest of the details that I'm not going into, you guys already know about. What we need to do is ensure horizontally integrated sales systems, as I would call it, kind of like an emergency measure, like right now, because for one, I haven't been able to sell anything this whole year, and when I do, I won't get more than $20,000 for it, if I'm lucky. And it's like, it's a lot, you know what I mean? And that's if I'm lucky. If I'm lucky, it could be half that much. And I'm talking about, like, you guys know how much you guys are asking
I think,
for?
I know that's really something we're working on in the ordinance. We want to get there as
That
fast
would
as
be really
we
nice to
can.
include.
And the other thing I just got to ask is we do have a lot to talk about tonight.
Okay, if we don't get a way to be able to community process, and let's say low impact light depths, I'm all for that. The big ones are really not necessary. You don't even really need much electricity to make it work. We need to think as a small community, because that's what we are. I'd like to take advantage of that. I know we can do that. Thank you.
I won't take up much of your time. I really appreciate you coming. Again, we all do. It's very important. I'd like to address, just very briefly, the July 14th deadline. As I understand it, that's the deadline before which our paperwork had to have been submitted to be considered for a provisional license, to be ready for the state licensing January 1st. Is that correct?
That would be the date by which your application was, the information was submitted to make it complete.
Okay. At one point, we were issued a letter first week, at least I was, first week of February, and my understanding at one point was that we had 6 months from that date to get our paperwork in, and that was the understanding that our consultant, Diana Totten, was working under, which led her time budgeting to get the paperwork in to meet the deadline, and I was wondering if it would be possible to extend that deadline slightly to meet that expectation.
I can tell that the July 14th date will be a subject to great amount of discussion at the Planning Commission and the board, I'm sure. And one of the things, again, that we were trying to do is be responsive to a group of people that are existing growers and who had taken the challenge to have their application deemed complete by June 30th of 2017.
Right.
We want to, I personally want to honor that. And so what we're trying to do is honor those people that broke their backs in order to get their application deemed complete to be in a position to submit for state licensing on January 1st. That's really the focus of what we're trying to do. That involves 655 permits. So that's a large number. That's a large number for us to turn around right now.
Right.
I mean, and we will present to the Planning Commission and to the board that people, everybody, I'm sure, would like all 1,800 applications we've got in right now. I'm sure everybody would like to have that applied to them.
Okay, thank you.
John, you said that you expect some enforcement upcoming that might involve water trucks. I would like to say that the Planning Commission duly considered the whole issue of water trucks and recognized that they cause a lot of damage to the roads. And yet, even though the present ordinance forbids their deliveries, they're coming out in huge streams. Truck after truck after truck are still coming out. There's absolutely no enforcement on that issue. And so it kind of raises the whole question of enforcement in general. Some years ago, we floated a law ordinance proposal to the board asking for fuel trucks to have some kind of regulation system put upon them. My inside information is that a certain petroleum distributor managed to kill our legislation by late night phone calls. But I think that the issue of fuel trucks also should be addressed. They are big, heavy trucks, and they are pretty darn dangerous to be having out on these roads. So I'd like to see you think a little bit about how that's all could be enforced also. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think what we'd like to do now is just move into talking about some of the larger provisions of the ordinance. Go ahead.
John, before we segue into the next thing, a couple things were raised about roads that I'd like to briefly address, just so the audience has a general understanding of some of the constraints that the Public Works Department is facing with road maintenance. The first one is understanding what a legal load is and how it's allowed on the county roads. The California Vehicle Code sets the maximum legal load of what can be driven on a road without the need for a transportation permit. As most everyone has alluded to, the heavier the vehicle, the more damage it will cause to the road. The county does not have the ability to restrict legal loads on a particular route. The only way that the county is able to restrict those loads is if we have a structure such as a bridge that does not have the structural capacity for those larger loads. Even a legal load, it could be reduced because the structure would fail if you take a bigger load across it. There are provisions in the code to take a extra heavy load or an extra wide, an oversized load with a transportation permit on our roads if the structures along the route can go ahead and support it. So the issue of the weight of vehicles is something that the county itself doesn't have a whole lot of say over. It's something that's set by the vehicle code and something that's only limited by the functional capacity of the bridges that might be along a particular route. The next item is dealing with our county maintained road system. Back in the early 2000s, the department realized that we were facing more maintenance challenges than our maintenance budget would go ahead and allow. And as a result of that, the department approached the board indicating this crisis that we can't keep accepting new roads into the maintained system unless there was a funding mechanism to go along with it to pay for that road maintenance. So what effectively happened back in the early 2000s is before a road could be considered eligible for acceptance into the county maintained system, first it needed to be improved to the appropriate levels for the road, and then second, it needs to go ahead and have an assessment district which would be passed by 2/3 of the people who use the road to go ahead and fund its ongoing road maintenance. So that's the kicker that comes in if the county's going to go ahead and take over maintenance. The bigger challenge that you would have with these private roads is, in addition to getting 2/3 of the people to vote for an assessment, to create that assessment district to fund road maintenance, you need 100% of the people who have their property along the road who are willing to grant public road easements to the county. So there are a lot of hurdles to overcome. One is 100% participation of people willing to grant public road easements. Two-thirds of the people willing to go ahead and vote for a special tax to go ahead and maintain the road. And 3, getting the road improved to a standard that the county is willing to go ahead and accept it. I'll pass it back to John.
And I asked John to give me the mic. I just want to say that right now it's 7 o'clock. And I'm a little concerned that we don't address some of the issues that we haven't, that we're basically going over some of the stuff that we've dealt with last time. So I would like to invite John to tell us the other issues that he would like to talk about tonight and try to not wander off too much because I really want you guys to have we want to hear your input on some of the other issues that are being.
Thank you, Supervisor Pennell. So what I think I would like to do, and hopefully this is agreeable to you, is that we're going to take a quick walk through the ordinance, look at the language, and just, I'm going to go through it really quick. I'm going to try to do it before 7:25, and then we'll devote the rest of the time this evening to receiving public testimony. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to start off with applicability and interpretation. And one of the issues that exists here that you'll want to get some thought about, it has this box that was there, and it talks about when does the ordinance apply, what does it apply to. The way it was originally drafted was that it would apply, the new ordinance would apply to everything that had not yet been approved. So even existing applications would then be subject to the ordinance. One of the things the Planning Commission is struggling with is whether or not it should apply to existing applications or not. And so that's this language here, which would identify that the ordinance would then only apply to new applications. Existing applications would need to comply with the existing ordinance 2559. So that is something that is definitely being discussed, and if you have some feelings about that, please do talk to us about that. The next item that we were looking at is item 55.4.3.8, and this says permits issued for commercial cannabis activities pursuant to the existing ordinance are governed by the terms and conditions of that ordinance as if they've remained in effect. And so one of the issues here that you want to pay particular attention to is there is a lot of controversy about whether or not existing permits, existing permitted grows that are particularly in close proximity to residential areas or higher density areas should be subject to the new regulations that may require some kind of mitigation for smell and so forth. So that's something that you may want to think about and give some comment to. Going to move down, and I think we're going to skip all the way through the definitions at this point. And we get down to section 55.4.5, general provisions applicable to commercial cannabis activity, land use permits. And you see the first thing, the special area provisions, the 600 feet from a school is still a requirement. The tribal lands are still requirements. We introduced something that's new to this ordinance, that in areas that are RA zoning districts, rural community centers or village centers, those would require a special permit. The item there that's 55.4.5.1.4 says a special permit shall be required for any commercial cannabis activity in a TPC zoning district when authorized pursuant to 55.4.6.5. What that's referring to is existing cultivation. So anytime you have an existing cultivation, it's going to require a special permit. And I'll point this out later where this applies. New permits are not intended for TPZ. There's something there for city spheres of influence, reservations, rancherias, and rural residential neighborhoods. And basically that a special permit would be required in those circumstances. When those circumstances are triggered, there would be an early notification process whereby we would send out a notice at the time an application is deemed complete, notifying people within 1,000 feet of the cultivation site that an application has been received. What that does is gives concerned residences early notification. In the next section, areas of traditional tribal cultural affiliation, we continue, as the existing ordinance does, to coordinate with tribal historic preservation officers and look for their input. Then there's the standard legal requirement for release of liability and indemnification to hold harmless. That's just what it sounds like. Penalties and enforcement is just what it sounds like. Permit limits and permit counting. One of the things that the Planning Commission is currently struggling with is whether or not the existing requirement limiting any
applicant or property owner to 4 permits should be continued to be defined in the same way. And there's a range of alternatives being considered there, from limiting it to just cultivation, limiting it to 4 acres of cultivation, and it really comes down to how we define the permits, or doing away with this section entirely, which is the last alternative that's presented. The next section, combination of open air cultivation activities, really is the same. You can have outdoor and mixed light. Those can be authorized through the same permit. The term is for a year. That requirement for the annual inspection, these are really not significantly different. The ability to appeal the findings of the inspection, and we clarified that this appeal would be heard by the zoning administrator, and obviously that's appealable to ultimately the Board of Supervisors. Talked about notification to the state. Then we get into the commercial cannabis cultivation, propagation, and processing open air districts, and this is where we start to talk about where things get permitted. And the first section there talks about the zoning, that new cultivation sites are allowed. And we've identified AE, AG, FR, and U when accompanied by a resource production general plan land use designation, not including timberland. And so timberland, the land use designation that would underlie a U zone would be the same as TPZ. And then we give minimum parcel sizes. A lot of this is carryover from the existing ordinance on 5-acre parcels up to 5,000 square feet with a zoning clearance certificate, 10,000 square feet with a special permit on parcels 10 acres or larger, 10,000 square feet with a zoning clearance certificate up to an acre with a special permit. So I know some of you will want to comment on that. And then C on parcels 320 acres or larger up to an acre of cultivation cultivation area per 100 acres. That's carried over from the existing ordinance. Then we talk about commercial and industrial areas, C3, ML, MH, and U. Some of the things we've tried to do here is to encourage the use of industrial sites, and for something with a 2-acre minimum parcel size, open air cultivation up to 1 acre can be approved with a zoning clearance certificate. Currently, that would require a conditional use permit. And then things over that can be permitted subject to a conditional use permit. Talk about energy, being a renewable energy source. We talk about water sources. And basically what we're trying to do is help applicants be prepared to address the state requirements and really give a very clear path through using rainwater catchment. The reference to road systems addresses the section we were talking about earlier. And then we talk about siting criteria, slope less than 15%, conversion to timberland is prohibited. One of the things, we had a conversation with some foresters and had an interesting conversation about what is timberland, what's not timberland, what's non-forested, and what's all that mean. So we need to give a little bit more definition to that. One of the big changes in the ordinance is the limitation on use of prime soils. There is no longer a requirement to be on prime soils for new cultivation, but we did retain the limitation to not exceed 20% of the area of prime agricultural soil on a parcel. Setbacks, we maintained a 30-foot setback from a property line and 300 feet from any residence. And as you can see on this one, there's a couple of alternatives there because the concern is that it be 300 feet from residences on an adjacent separately owned parcel, and that we also take into account the probability that it could be a vacant parcel and somebody may in the future want to put a residence there, and they may still want to have a 300-foot separation, and so that needs to be taken into account. We've retained the sensitive receptor requirement, 600 feet from a school bus stop, church, or other place of worship, public park, or tribal cultural resource. And then there's also a new requirement that came in at the request of our consultations with the tribes, is that tribal ceremonial sites have a 1,000-foot setback. And a tribal cultural site needs to be a specific place where ceremonies are currently actively held. The allowance to reduce those setbacks continues to be in there. That's item F. So if a school district, a church, a tribe is willing to reduce the setback, that possibility still exists. Going down to pre-existing cultivation sites. So pre-existing cultivation sites are allowed in AE, HE, forest recreation, FP, TPZ, and U. And one of the important lines there is expansion of pre-existing cultivation sites is prohibited where located within TPZ or U zones where the general plan land use designation is timberland. So the idea here is that there is no expansion and there is no new cultivation within TPZ or within the U designation where the underlying land use designation is timberland. The next section we come to is the existing small cultivation sites, and this doesn't show the changes that we talked about earlier, but we will be inserting the alternative that we showed you earlier today into this when we present it to the Planning Commission next Thursday night. Energy sources for ancillary propagation facility, we've tried to limit the use of generators and require either renewable sources. And the idea that we're trying to get to here by allowing the 20% isn't that people would use their generator 20% of the time. The idea is that sometimes there just are emergencies. Sometimes when you're in the middle of a propagation season and it's towards the end and it's foggy every single day, you may need supplemental light. That's what we're trying to accommodate for, recognizing that there may be a desire to not see generators used. 5.5, the next section on provisional permitting identifies the same thing that we talked about a little earlier. This is the section that allows us to enter into an agreement with an applicant to have plans drawn up within a year, and then improvements or corrections be done within 2 years. And that section really is a carryover from the existing ordinance. We added a new section that people laugh at us about, but we think it's appropriate, which is the Myers Flat community area. It's an area of small existing cultivation sites that is largely all cultivation sites and doesn't really fit within any of the other criteria. And so to allow that as existing cultivation, allow it to continue to exist, we thought was appropriate. We then get into the retirement, remediation, and relocation of pre-existing cultivation sites. We've tried to expand the circumstances under which the RRR would be allowed to accommodate for things like roads, for other things that may get in the way of being able to get a permit. And the idea here isn't to force people out, but really to give people a good, viable alternative when there are true encumbrances to trying to permit an existing site. There is a section there on site restoration upon termination or abandonment of commercial cannabis cultivation sites, and that is new, and the idea here is that sites need to be cleaned up. We've added a new section on cannabis support facilities, and what this really does is identifies distribution, offsite processing, enclosed nurseries, community propagation centers, cannabis testing and research laboratories. And we've tried to create a scenario where they can be permitted basically on an existing roads where they have power and everything else as basically a permitted use. There has been pushback on some of these things, wanting to see them on roads that aren't necessarily paved. And so we are looking at alternatives there that may allow increased discretion, higher level of permit to review those. There's then a section, this is new, distribution, offsite processing, enclosed nurseries and community propagation centers, identifies the zones in which would be permitted C3, ML, MH, and U, as well as C2 and MB. Identify cannabis testing and research laboratories. We then go into where indoor cultivation and manufacturing can be permitted. Again, one of the concerns here is the road network which serves the site and what kind of road that should be required. And the initial attempt was to make things in industrial zones extremely simple. That included with paved roads. We will be looking at alternatives to that. The next section continues indoor cultivation, allows it in AE, AG, FR, and U up to 5,000 square feet of indoor cultivation with a zoning clearance certificate. And one of the issues here is whether or not within those zones specified under 55.4.6.2, whether or not C2 should be a zone in which indoor cultivation is allowed. Then address manufacturing. We talked a little bit about adaptive reuse of industrial sites. The idea here is to continue to allow use of industrial sites in a way that's appropriate with the zoning clearance certificate, but also does not preclude the future return of industrial development to the site. We've created some other provisions, including adult use retail sales, farm-based retail sales. This would allow retail sales directly from the farm, provisions for micro businesses, temporary special events, on-site cannabis consumption, commercial cannabis tours and tour sites, cannabis farm stays. We go through and identify the application requirements. We've taken a lot of the information out of the requirement because we want to just have those requirements in a list that's generated by the Planning and Building Department and not included within the ordinance. There's a list there then of performance standards that apply to all commercial cannabis activities. We get into the performance standards, the road systems, the dead-end road length. One of the things that I want to say in terms of standard one there, it says project shall not be located more than 2 miles from the nearest intersection with the Category 4 road that is part of a system providing secondary access. So we heard you on that, and we are evaluating whether that needs to be a Category 4 road or not. The main criteria there is that there needs to be alternative points of access so that from a fire safety standpoint, we're not precluding emergency access if one of the access points happens to be blocked off. We talked about the functional capacity. One of the issues here with functional capacity is that if you're on a Category 4 road with a centerline stripe and 2-foot, 10-foot wide travel lanes, no additional work needs to be done. If it's anything else than that, the next step is to do a self-certification. If you can demonstrate that it's a Category 4 road, then you're done. No additional work needs to be done beyond that. If there are sections of the road that are less than Category 4, then after that, we would need to have that evaluated. Now keep in mind that what we presented to you earlier for the small grow exceptions was that the small grows would not be subject to that requirement. And so it specifically exempted these requirements. Then there's the section addressing protection for water quality and biological resources. So the difference here for the small grows is that this would not be a requirement of the application up front as part of the review process. That would be deferred until after the permit is granted, and then that would be accomplished as part of the provisional approval
as part of the 1 year to get the study done, to get any plans done to demonstrate that, and then an additional year after that to have any improvements done. The larger grows would need to comply with that as part of their application process. The section on the Road Maintenance Association and cost sharing, we've talked about that a little bit already. The next section is on performance standards for commercial cannabis cultivation activities. I don't think a lot of that or any of that is new. We've attempted to address performance standards for light pollution control, and I don't think that there's actually D is new, that we would, actually no. The structures used for mixed light cultivation or nurseries are prohibited within 200 feet of the riparian zone. That is something that came out of consultations with wildlife agencies that we've had, and basically that is to protect wildlife corridors. And so then D is also new, which would give people 10 days to respond to that. There's the performance standards for energy use, and then performance standards for noise from generator use at pre-existing sites. And this, I'm sure, will be somewhat controversial. And item A says in TPZ zones and U zones with the general plan designation of timberland, the use of generators is prohibited. And then B, we're located within 1 mile of mapped critical habitat for marbled murrelet or spotted owls. Where timberland is present, the maximum noise exposure from the combination of background and generator created noise may not exceed 50 decibels measured at a distance of 100 feet. So those, again, are new and something that you will want to think about. The permit application needs to be able to demonstrate the noise impact levels. Then we've added some sections on performance standards for diversionary water use, and a lot of what this does is identify that a special permit is required when working in a stream management area. And then identified the forbearance period and storage requirements. One of the recommendations that's been made is that we should really plan the forbearance period from May 15th through November 31st, not October 31st. In answer to the question why is because October typically does not see a lot of rainfall. And so really at that point, it would be best to continue to rely on stored water and not begin to divert water when the water is probably at its lowest level. Performance standards for water storage, performance standards for wells on small parcels. This came out of the EIR, and really it imposes a requirement on wells on small parcels to demonstrate that they are not adversely affecting wells on adjacent parcels. One of the things we try to do with respect to soil deliveries is in the next section down in C, where requiring a special permit for any use that is not reusing at least 75% of their soils. Existing site reconfiguration, we tried to give some guidance to existing sites where it can be demonstrated that for environmental purposes, it's better to reconfigure the site than to keep things where they are. And it kind of lays that out. But another section on adaptive reuse of industrial sites. And that was one of the questions that seemed a little confusing for folks last time, and we know we need to take a look at that. I think the other things that we had talked a little bit about, or these are new, is trying to create standards for public accommodation and allowing tour operations, and that's what the last two sections of the ordinance are, to try to identify when it would be appropriate to have canna tourism
go to the farm sites where these uses can be and to try to lay out the path to have the individual sites approved for tourism. The idea here is that it would be the site that needed to be approved to receive either buses or public coming to it for tourism purposes, so that would be part of the approval process, so that there would be a permit for the cultivation and also a permit to allow tours to come to the site. At this point, I'm going to stop. I went 5 minutes over, so we will accept public testimony on what's been presented here at this point. No, look at, there should be a blue button. Make sure the blue button is pulled towards you. Tilt it down a little bit so it's right at your mouth.
Is that better?
That's
oh,
perfect.
There it is.
Thank you.
You have to be kind of on top of it. Let's see. I think these are more questions. What you talked about at the beginning with the new ordinance amendments applying. You seem to be up in the air about whether the new ordinance should apply to people who already applied, put in their permits, but they haven't been approved. I would just say, probably let the people that met certain deadlines but they haven't been completed, go ahead and stick with the original application process. Then I just had a question about, went by it so fast and I haven't read it since last week, but the 300-foot distance from the cultivation site to a residence. So is that any different from the way it was in the original? Because in the original, if you were closer than 300 feet to a residence, that you would get a letter of agreement with the neighbor that it was all right. Is that still?
In the existing ordinance, the 300 feet only applies to smaller parcels. One of the things that we're trying to do is identify, one of the complaints is that from neighboring property owners, that they think that 300 feet should apply on all size parcels. And this ordinance is now drafted to provide that 300-foot setback in all cases.
So even if the neighboring parcel was willing to give a written permission, that if they were okay with the grow, and a small grow, less than 5,000 square foot?
That's not how it's currently configured, but we will certainly take that comment into consideration.
Because what do you do if there's a neighboring parcel that has no residence on it and you're unable to contact the owner after several attempts?
It's a good question. One of the things the Planning Commission was struggling with is, since there's already a minimum 30-foot setback, is that it should be at least 270 feet from the property line in those cases, to make sure there's a 300-foot separation in the event that when the future property is developed.
Because if you've already arranged your cultivation area to meet an empty parcel and 30 feet from the setback at great labor, you put in your permit, and now suddenly it would be different? I don't know if I'm being clear.
I think you're being clear. What I get is from you on 2 points is that if you laid it out and you're already existing and you don't have a 300-foot setback, I mean, basically at that point you get your permit, and that gets to your first point, then that permit continues to apply.
Okay. Then, try to take some notes. Oh, the stream diversion. So I've got my water papers in, and I guess there's going to be more of a process with the state when you're doing stream diversion. But the county's saying you could get a special permit. We do divert and we forbear. We have plenty of storage. But how much are you going to charge for this permit when it's all?
It doesn't really cost extra. I mean, you're going to have to apply for one or more permits anyway. And the issue is that if you're diverting,
you're working within a stream side management area. And so that, by the zoning ordinance, requires a permit. So that really doesn't change. All that we've done in this ordinance is to create that intentional linkage between the provisions of the zoning ordinance for the stream side management area and the cannabis regulations.
Okay.
That's really not new.
Okay, so, because if you've got your permit from the state and for the Fish and Wildlife and your...
Right, but the county still has regulations addressing stream side management areas that require a permit. And technically, we're the lead agency. We should be the first to issue the permit.
So if you're complying with your forbearance and no disturbance of the native habitat kind of situation and the proper type of pumping situation, shouldn't be a problem?
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hello again. I've got just a series of small questions for you. It says at the beginning of the ordinance that an RA zone requires a special permit. But then when I look down at the cultivation things, there aren't any RA zones where new cultivation or existing is allowed. Did I miss something?
Actually, that is an error that we made in the original draft that needs to be corrected. The RA zones did not qualify for new cultivation.
Okay, so that is just going to be struck.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Now, the ordinance says that existing permits or existing applications will go through under the provisions of the old ordinance, the ordinance they applied for. Then it says, except for the roads. So we're back to roads. It says anyone renewing their permit is going to be subject to the road standards. I mean, those two things are incompatible to me. And applying those road standards to people who've already come into the system, done all their permitting, seems a bit...
Where are you reading that from, Ed?
Well, I haven't got the site here, but
I
looked it up 3 times.
Okay.
I want to say 55.4.12.8, but I could be wrong. But if it's not your intention to have renewals be subject to the road provisions, then that's fine with me. If it's in there, it could just be struck.
Yeah, I think it's our intention. But our basic intention is when somebody gets a permit, they should be able to rely on that permit.
Yes. So if that turns out to be in there, it's your intention to take it out?
Do you recall this, Steve?
Yeah, it was an intentional exception to, trying to carve out a protection for the rules being only applicable at the time of permit with the exception of the roads because of these shared road issues that we want to see everyone participating in. But that was an early attempt at trying to bring these people into that, but only on that topic. So it wasn't intentional.
So,
could I say one more very important point on that? Is that while the standards that are written in the draft ordinance are new for roads, what we're doing and what we're thinking in terms of the need to address the impacts are not. Right now, one of the things we're struggling with is the fact that there may be roads out there that have a lot of cultivators on them that are taking the roads beyond their capacity, their functional capacity. That needs to be addressed. That exists right now under the existing ordinance.
But I don't see that it needs to be addressed at the expense of the people who have applied for existing cultivation and no expansion. They're not adding to the burden on those roads. The burden is coming from the black market.
There is a lot of truth there. I don't know that we see completely eye to eye on the first part, but the second part, you're absolutely correct.
Okay, so you can enter this as a comment that should not, that people who renew their permit should not be subject to the road standards. Did you define riparian zone? I'm sorry, it's just difficult to look this stuff up on the fly. If you didn't define
It's not defined in this ordinance. It is defined in the stream site management area.
yeah, it would be useful, at least to me, if you defined it in this ordinance. And that's all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed.
I can understand the arguments about people's needing to follow the rules of the ordinance that they got their permit under, but it's a clear, we have a clear message from the community, and we understand from our own perspective the impact on the roads, and it's got to be addressed. And I'm actually going to look at the exemption for small grows also in terms of at least the discussion. If you've got a whole bunch of small grows on a road, does that need to be taken into consideration? So I'm just saying, we really, really need to be serious about the impacts here.
The definition of rainwater, the Rainwater Capture Act of 2010 says that you can't even ask for permits for rainwater that come off of, quote, any structure, is the way they phrase it, any sort of structure. Then later on in this, it also says that water can be gathered from any, say, ditch or road, man-made surface, basically. That is still a structure, until it either enters a stream or runs off to property, is the way that the state has defined this, and that's not the way you are in this regulation here.
Thanks for that. We will definitely look at that.
Okay. Another problem is you say any 28-inch tree that you're removing is a serious forestry issue. That's in circumference. That's a 12 to 14-inch tree. So any tree that you remove is going to require a permit, a special permit, or it sounded good because it was saying a 28-inch tree. This is for existing for permitted grows. If you remove, and I wish I could give you the section, it says, if you're removing any trees bigger than 28-inch circumference breast height. Well, that's actually a 12-inch diameter tree, which where I come from is a baby. I have 6,000 plants and use 90 million gallons of water. They're called trees. I cut them down all the time. You have to. That's part of good land use practices. Another issue is the SMA and the other grading ordinances were established in 84. What about pre-existing? I know a lot of people have old logging roads that they either put a house on or grew on or whatever. Are you trying to apply these retroactively?
No.
Okay, so if you're coming with a code enforcement thing, you better have evidence that it was a recent stuff.
So let me make one thing real clear, is that the discussion of permitting and code enforcement should be separated far, far apart. because code enforcement doesn't come after people who have permits. If we find that they're out of compliance and they're they're participating in the permit process, we come at it from the perspective of the permit, not code enforcement. If they're completely outside the permit process, then, or, one other caveat, or if law enforcement gets involved, then code enforcement gets involved.
Sure, but for years, we've had these issues with code enforcement raids.
I understand that. This is not been. This is not been. I'm telling you right now.
But you were just saying that you were going to do code enforcement.
We're doing
on
code enforcement
houses?
against people. No, not against houses.
Okay.
No, we're doing code enforcement against large illegal grows.
Yes.
That we have identified that have done significant grading, put in significant greenhouses, have significant amounts of cannabis grows that have come into place within the last year.
Wonderful. I thank you very much. That's just what we want.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sawyer Vogel. I'm a small farmer in Myers Flat. No pun intended. So, I would like to thank you guys for putting the provision in for Myers Flat. But could we look at the provision, please? Pull that up. I have a question on the last line of it. I'm pretty sure I understand it says I have to move after 6 weeks or 6 months of cultivation. And because Myers Flat's considered a floodplain, you're not supposed to live there all year anyway. So, but if they're going to put that in there, I was just wondering how that's going to affect me.
Yeah, you're talking about the line that says temporary use of an RV for up to 6 months may be permitted in conjunction with cannabis cultivation,
Correct.
if permitted.
Yes.
Yep.
So that means I'll have to move within the after my cultivation's finished.
Well, I would ask, are you currently living on site?
Correct.
And are you living in an RV?
Correct.
Okay, so, and that's traditionally how you've been living, and you have a permitted on-site wastewater system?
Correct, yes.
We need to talk more about this and figure something out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Kristen Neville with the International Cannabis Farmers Association, and I just want to start by saying thank you because I am going to criticize a little bit. My apologies. I really love the idea of doing these interim permits. I do have some concerns about the July 14th date. Your department got incredibly overloaded as we were moving closer to the June 30th deadline, and even with applications that came in December, later in December too, there was a lot of overload and some human error that happened in data entry. So for example, I worked with some farmers whose registered agent was Atlas Engineering, and a lot of their addresses were entered in wrong. So we spent a lot of time in the planning department checking in, but then never received letters. I mean, we even paid bills and didn't receive notices. So we actually thought we were complete for a really long time, and then received the notice like 2 days before the June 30th deadline. It's challenging. And then when I did receive the letter and finally went through it, it was all new criteria that hadn't been part of the original application. That is also quite challenging to manage. So I do have some concerns. I really admire the intention. I think it's hugely important. But human error poses challenges, right? And we're just trying to figure this system out. A couple other questions specific to the draft ordinance. One of the things with these provisional permits is I noticed, and I didn't have a chance to get through all of it, but this morning the state released what they're calling the final draft regulations for the Water Quality Control Board. And there's a lot of new language in there about ponds. So, for example, it's prohibited for a cannabis cultivator to store water in an off-stream pond or reservoir unless they have a permit from their local municipality. So currently, folks can't get pond permits even if they're retroactive for ponds that have existed for a while, until they make it through this cannabis process. So I'm wondering if they have provisional permits, will there be a way for them to move those pond permits forward so that they can meet the water standards that are being put forth by the water board?
So you're asking a question that we struggle with deeply, and the short answer is no. And the reason is because a lot of the parcels that we're dealing with, we haven't even demonstrated that the parcels are legal yet. So if we issue any permit, we are creating legal parcels. And so what we're trying to do is put people in a place to get state licenses without jeopardizing the rest of the process.
Right, and so they probably won't be eligible if their ponds are their main source of water under the final draft. I mean, because they won't be able to meet any water standards. And so I don't think we have to figure this out right now, but it is a concern that I was hoping I could note. Additionally, in section 55.4.6.5.6, which refers to mixed light cultivation and generator use. That first sentence I'm a little confused about in that section because I think there's supposed to be an or where there's an and. Ultimately, how it's currently written, it would prohibit both mixed light cultivation and generator use, as opposed to generator use for the purposes of mixed light cultivation. So I was a little curious about that, and a few more comments about mixed light. The 200-foot setback from a riparian area, I'm quite confused about that because in the ordinance there's a lot of language about dark skies and having to meet dark skies, so can't use generators in those areas, obviously, right? So there's not going to be a noise issue, and if folks were abiding by the ordinance, then they would be closing their curtains while their lights are on, so then they wouldn't be lighting up the skies and creating a wildlife issue. So I'm not sure why we aren't enforcing dark skies and instead having this 200-foot setback. I'll leave it at that, and thank you very much.
Thanks, we'll take a look at that.
Hi, thanks for your time. I just had a quick question about no generators on TPZ parcels. So we are an existing parcel, permit application is in. We use solar and hydro most of the year for all our needs, except in October when we have a propane generator that fills up our batteries. Are you saying that that's not allowed?
That's how it's currently written, that is correct.
So, how is that enforced? What can I do about this? I mean, our whole system is rigged with this propane generator.
So one of the things that maybe you could help us do is understand how to mitigate the noise and activity impact of TPZ associated with generators. And I keep hearing about propane generators, but I haven't seen the spec sheets or anything on them to know what a difference they make. And if maybe it's something that those actually do end up being so quiet that there's no impact. And as Kristen just mentioned, if the dark sky is actually enforced, maybe we can get to a place where those are, the restrictions aren't as restrictive, if that makes sense, and we accomplish the same result. But right now, the issue is it's one of noise getting in the way of the habitat of the northern spotted owl and the marbled murrelet.
A clarifying question then. Is this for specifically grows, like marijuana related, or like if it's attached to my house?
Grows.
Just grows?
Yep.
Okay.
Maybe that should be part of the cannabis ordinance. But it's just on TPZ land. Okay.
Thank you for having this workshop again tonight. And I'm piggybacking on TPZ. I got myself a couple notes. The generator, you kind of seem to answer my question. If you have a generator and you use it for your household, if that's okay on a TPZ, but not for anything associated with the grow. Is that correct or incorrect?
That's how it's currently written, that's correct.
Okay, so if somebody has a quiet generator that they're using for their house, can they power part of, say, electrical fans, or would that be violating your regulations? And if that generator met specs of 50 decibels, what would be the issue?
The feedback we're getting from the Department of Fish and Wildlife is 50 decibels is not quiet enough.
Chainsaws are quite louder than that.
Point taken.
It's the reason I'm asking these questions. I do own TPZ, and I feel that Department of Fish and Wildlife is kind of overstretching. I've done the spotted owl survey. It'll be completed this week, actually. There's a lot of things that they're, in my consultant's opinion, overstretching what needs to be done. If you were just harvesting timber, it wouldn't be such an issue. The 200-foot riparian setbacks I disagree with, because they classify I would say a bona fide drainage ditch as a riparian class 3 water course. If you follow the dark sky rules and pull your tarps if your lights are on, it shouldn't matter if you're 50 feet, which is setbacks for any grows right now, or 200 feet from the riparian setbacks, because if you're obeying by the current county ordinance, I don't see how it would affect any wildlife.
I think the point is that unfortunately a lot of the existing growers that are responsible get mixed in with all of the illegal growers who aren't responsible. And so the concern is that there's an awful lot of generators and a lot of greenhouses that are lighting up the night sky. And they are interfering with wildlife, and they are chasing wildlife away and destroying habitat. And so this was our first cut at it. We're happy to be talking about it here. If you can give us feedback and information that we can incorporate into the ordinance and spec sheets and cut sheets that would help us to develop better regulations, happy to do that.
Well, I would say a lot of this, I've seen sites, they have 100 kW generators powering multiple greenhouses. If you follow just North Coast Air Quality Board's rules, it's basically anything smaller than a 45, you don't have to register with air quality. My generator, I personally check to make sure my horsepower specs meet their rules, and you don't have to register with them. So some of these large noise issues are actually already taken care of if you deal with air quality control. One other question I have for you, your special permit for diversion. Are you going to say that somebody who has culverts that go through a water course but does not divert any water from a water course would also need to file a special permit?
The struggle with the special permit is that anything you do within a streamside management area requires the permit. It's not just diversion. It's really the improvement, regardless of what it is.
So that'll be another permit we have to file with the county if we have a 1600 with Fish and Game, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then lastly, if this is
Could I just say, that's already a requirement though. I gotta be honest, this is not new.
Somehow I guess I missed that part. I mean, I have the 1600, but I didn't know that there's another permit I gotta file with you guys.
We should look at your application, Thomas, and make sure that it's complete so we get everything permitted correctly.
That would be great. And then the other question I have, and I've said this before, if cannabis is an agricultural commodity and you can legally clear TPZ land to put in grapes or any other agricultural commodity, why you cannot clear land for cannabis if you meet road, slope requirements, and any other water requirements? Why is TPZ excluded?
I don't know that you can clear TPZ land to put in agricultural crops. That's a conversion.
Yeah, you would do a conversion.
Well, that's a different story. That's a much longer process.
You would file a 3-acre conversion. I'm just saying, I'm curious why the county...
Number one, cannabis is not treated the same as other agricultural crops. It's not treated and it's not given the same rights as the right to farm. Crops are. It's addressed in a different provision in state code than agriculture is. It's in the food provisions of the Food and Agriculture law. So it's not treated as agriculture. Everybody wants to call it agriculture. It is clearly growing a plant. Not going to argue that. But it's not treated the same way. The state level, it's not treated the same way in the regulations in the county.
Okay, I see that being a big problem for people with TPZ, that our homesteaders have legal residences, and maybe they're going to be able to pay all these state fees and county fees. They may need to expand, and that's something that should be looked at, as long as they meet the environmental proper. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all for coming. I see that in cannabis support facilities, it still says paved road or class 4, or paved with center line or paved in category 4 standard. And you indicated that there might be some exceptions to that, and I just want to reiterate my support for exceptions to that. I live on Island Mountain Road. I spoke last time that we're one of the traditional heritage cannabis communities, and I think facilities like a nursery or propagation centers or processing centers would be perfectly appropriate in our neighborhood. I also wanted to say that even though I like the intention of the renewable energy standards, I think that there should maybe be a certain size that is exempt from it. For instance, I have a purely outdoor grow that uses no power the entire year, except for in October, November for drying facilities. And while it may make sense to put in or to have a small alternative energy system for a cabin, it doesn't make sense to put in an alternative energy system that can power, several dehumidifiers and fans when they're only being used 4 weeks out of the year. So I would propose that you add something like maybe farms that use under 5,000 kilowatt hours per year, or some reasonable standard like that shows that the farm is already environmentally sensitive because it barely uses any electricity to begin with. So why force those farms into making more investments? I think that is all. Thank you guys for coming.
Hi again. I just wanted to very quickly address the question you posed about what we thought about changing the rules after applicants have completed their permits on one basis. Would it be fair to change the terms of their permit after the fact? Well, on its face, obviously that's not fair. It kind of surprised me, therefore, that Bob McKee spent more than $2 million unable to prove that it was unfair enough that the state couldn't do it to him. So it's come to my attention that it's not at all unusual for what we think of as straightforward contracts to change their terms without necessarily getting the agreement of the person who signed the original contract. That just happens in county and state permitting all the time. I've learned that when I started going through the state water process and the county pot process, when I was just dismayed to discover one mandate after another just dreamed up and piled onto the obligations that I was taking on by starting the permitting process. So, with that history, my answer to your question is, yes, I think you should very seriously consider restricting the size of people who have already received grotesquely overscaled permits for operations that are causing all of this destruction and neighborhood dissolution that so many people are complaining about. It was a mistake to allow that in the first place. We should learn from our mistakes and really seriously consider limiting future damage and pulling back on present damage.
How's it going? I have a question about the Myers Flat provision involving the floodplain. We currently have 3 cultivation permits. They are currently for outdoor, and we avoided doing mixed light because of the floodplain. We have a 4th parcel that's zoned highly commercial that I would like to see opened up so we can do some mixed light cultivation. It's 6.5 acres, extends 800 feet off the Avenue of the Giants, and if we were allowed to use it, there would still be probably 80%, 90% of the parcel still available for other uses, which is my understanding why you have shied away from allowing cultivation on highway commercial. Thank you.
Hello. Sorry, hang on a second. I just have a few items that Kelly Flotis with Market Advisors. I sent these all to you, but I wanted to get some clarification on a few items in the document. So section 554657, provisional permitting, requests that applicants provide plans for curing any violations within 1 year of issuance. But then as part of the application, it says that they have to include a plan and schedule to abate and cure all violations. So it sounds like you're asking for the same thing at 2 different times. So some clarification is helpful for that one.
Thank you.
Section 55410.2 and .3. .2 is farm-based retail sales, and .3 is microbusiness. Microbusiness is not permitted in TPZ, whereas retail farm is not allowing you with an underlying designation of timberland. So it's a little unclear why you would have different prohibitions for microbusiness versus retail sales. Clarification would be good on that. Section 55412.2.3, this is performance standards. It says where no agreement has been secured for prior work within areas of a Department of Fish and Wildlife jurisdiction, notification pursuant to 1602 of Fish and Game Code shall not commence until processing of county permit has been completed. The challenge with this is that getting a 1600 permit is often difficult and may be a determining factor in whether to pursue getting a cultivation permit. So we don't believe that it would make sense for somebody to go through the entire county permitting process and then go through the Fish and Wildlife process to find out that it won't qualify. So we think that those two should maintain separate pursuant, and that it shouldn't limit somebody from pursuing a 1600 permit by requiring the county permit first. Section 55412.4, I want to reiterate what Kristen had said earlier with the issue of the 200-foot setback in riparian zones. We just want to make it clear that the State Water Resources Control Board, as well as Fish and Wildlife, regulates riparian zones, 50-foot, 100-foot, 150-foot setbacks, depending on the type of waterway, and that folks have been following those compliance requirements. Placing a more strict 200-foot general setback requirement seems too excessive. Just a couple more. Section 55412.5, this stands for energy use. As you've heard, there's a big challenge with folks in rural areas who do not have grid power, who are using generators. We know that the sound issue needs to be addressed. Many of them are getting enclosures for their generators. We believe that it's very important for the county to create pathways to compliance. All of the other environmental benefits that are happening because of regulations should not be thrown out because somebody uses a generator. The provisions for using a generator, and as Director Ford, as you mentioned, there needs to be a more descriptive way to allow people to continue to use energy in an environmentally friendly friendly way, or at least allow a path to compliance. It may be a 2 or 3 years before you have to have sustainable energy. People need time to make those changes. And the other benefits of, having proper setbacks, of clearing out, of improving roads, and those other benefits should not be thrown out because somebody hasn't taken the time to get to compliance. The pathway to compliance really needs to be the objective in that case. And then section 55412.7, performance standards for diversionary water use. And it's requesting a water budget showing weekly and monthly past and projected irrigation demands, including daily irrigation demand for periods of peak use. We just want to reiterate and help you guys understand that farmers are not statisticians. So daily data collection is a bit of an extreme request. You may end up getting very inaccurate information with people doing very general estimates with those kinds of requirements. Monthly requirements are existing in state regulations for division of water rights, and it makes sense to maintain those requirements for monthly data collection. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I was just, I wanted to sort of create some allowance within this general plan that would allow for buildings on industrial properties to build and infill and create industrial property where there was otherwise none, and as long as there were alternative uses for this property, alternative principally permitted uses for this property, I would like you to be able to permit those, to be able to process those permits. For instance, residential, C3 properties, they're allowed to build residential and other light industrial applications are available for them. I would like for the considering especially that there is the lack of housing, I would like that the residential aspects be permitted, and that as a builder, I'm allowed to go on and build and rent on a property that is really just sitting there vacant right now. And so that's my concern with that. Additionally, I'd like to voice some concerns about this conditional use permit process. I was struggling trying to get in under your deadline that you had posed on June 30th and was not able to contact anyone that could explain to me about the conditional use permit process and why I need to apply again for a conditional use permit process.
You shouldn't have had to apply again.
Well, that's what happened.
Maybe we could take this up afterwards because you couldn't have applied again. We couldn't have accepted.
I filed a whole permit. I wrote a check to them. I have a receipt for the check. Okay, and I was not able to find anyone within the department who could explain to me why I need to file for this permit. And going on from that, I feel that so there's 3 uses that I'm applying for on this property. One is the residential processing, and as well as the cultivation. I feel that the uses should be considered individually, especially given the fact that the Garberville Municipal is still developing their ordinance, and so they need time, and so we don't. I don't want that to uphold the whole building process. I'd like to be able to at least do something processing, having people living there, having this property be of some use. Thank you.
Your definition of rainwater catchment includes bladders, and later on in the ordinance, it says you can't use bladders. You might want to correct that contradiction.
Hi, thanks, Sean, for being here. I'm sorry, I've been busy and gone a lot lately. I've meant to review the ordinance. I was trying to bring it up on my phone earlier, but the link on the county site doesn't seem to work. So some of this is, I might have to ask a couple of questions here. So the 200-foot setback requirement for nurseries, my entire parcel is within 200 feet of a parent area at the intersection of Bryson Road and Old Bryson Road. So that would make it completely impossible. I seem to recall the last time I looked at the ordinance that nurseries were defined as wholesale. I have a retail nursery. So let's do that if you will, or what you will. And again, sorry, I couldn't look this up myself. The performance standards for soils, does that apply to nurseries? Or is that just cultivation?
That's cultivation.
Okay, good, just because it makes no sense. And then, oh, maybe that was it. That was it. Yeah, I guess the main thing is...
200 feet wouldn't apply to you either.
Okay, but you did say nurseries though. It was mixed like nurseries, correct?
No, I don't think so. Does it say that?
I thought
that wasn't, well, the intent was in TPZ, okay?
Just in TPZ?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, so much playing. Yeah, so I think the main thing, I guess, is when I have nurseries is that wholesale. Is that in there as wholesale? Nurseries are defined as wholesale nurseries?
We're trying to address both wholesale and retail nurseries.
Yeah, because I do both.
Right.
So, yeah. Okay.
An estimated 10,000 Humboldt residents worked in their own business during 2012, according to the most recent available data from the U.S. Census Bureau. Entrepreneurs are significantly more common in Humboldt than the rest of California or the nation. So I ask you to consider a recent choice by the County Board of Supervisors to allow small-scale local animal slaughter in Marin County. The change in the code unanimously approved by the Board of Supervisors this year allows small-scale slaughter of poultry, less than 20,000 birds or rabbits per year. The permits include mobile slaughter units for all kinds of animals, including cows, pigs, and poultry, to visit farms. The county won't be inspecting slaughter operations, although USDA inspects all slaughter.
Could I ask you a question?
Cows, pigs.
Sir, we're talking about a cannabis ordinance. Do you have a point relative to the cannabis ordinance, or?
Yes, I'm bringing up the example. I'm bringing up the example of meat slaughter because I think it shows a good example of how there could be small-scale processing as a service provided by entrepreneurs in the area, which there currently aren't regulations for. Mobile non-solvent processing.
So what is it that you would like to see in the ordinance that doesn't exist?
Mobile non-solvent processing of cannabis resin.
Thank you.
I would like to address the few requests that I have heard about the size limit of 3,000 square feet. And I'm not really challenging it, but I would like to just air caution, and that is if you want young families to survive in the hills, I'm not sure that a 3,000 square foot limit would actually allow a family to survive, unless you're really super efficiently farming. This is just a caution.
Well, I would like to comment on the water issue. I did get my stuff from the Division of Water Rights, and I'm doing the 150 days forbearance. And in my plan to the Division of Water Rights, I said that I would not pump in December, but I would pump in November. And if you don't want us to pump in November, I totally set myself up to do 7.5 months without pumping.
Thank you. We will take that into consideration.
Thank you
very much.
I'd just like clarification on the 200-foot riparian order. Is that excluding the use of bioswales, retention basins that have already been either established or approved in the process approved for use by professionals.
Let me take a look at it.
This was recommended by a water board, state water board, water quality control person, water resource management, using bioswales. Not near a large, it's just a ditch.
So while the 200 feet, let me just be clear, the 200 feet is not for water quality purposes. So if you're putting in improvements within the 200 feet, I mean, as long as it's complying with our streamside management area, you know, we'll permit that, that's not a problem. The intent of the 200 feet was to open up an area where there was no light and going on to protect a wildlife corridor. That was the idea behind that.
Okay. And then I was gonna kind of agree with Hans, I believe his name is, the 3,000 square foot as a small growth. I actually wrote a letter addressed it to you and Steve Lazar. Just say you have a multi-generational small family farm. You just might need to accommodate a little bit larger than.
Well, so we're not saying that 3,000 square feet is the most that can be permitted. We're saying that if you are 3,000 square feet, we're going to give you some consideration for the fact that you are small and that you're not going to have the same amount of impact, so we're not going to require the same level of review, and so that there is some benefit there if you want to go smaller. If you want to go larger and permit that, you still can. I mean, that needs to be clearly understood.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks. So we're at 8:20 right now. We were going to end at 8. So I'll accept 2 more comments, and then unless somebody else really has to say something new and burning, we're going to stop for the night.
Yeah, after working for, I don't know, 6-8 years on the general plan update, Fish and Wildlife was there, and basically they said these setbacks, the streamside management areas, were the purview of the county, not Fish and Wildlife, basically. And they were asking to put it in there for some very good reasons. But with the general plan update, your EIR is saying that any of the three criterion for a wetland, one was the soils, the other was vegetation, and the other I don't remember. The trees you listed were like laurel, California laurel. And at the time with the GPU, I objected very much, and the Planning Commission and the SUPS basically approved 2 out of 3. And now the EIR is, your recommendation is go back to 1 out of 3?
No, that is not true.
Okay.
What we're taking back to the board is using the Army Corps of Engineer definition of a wetland, which is a 3 criteria wetland. You have to have hydrant soil, you have to have hydrant vegetation, and you have to have the presence of water. You got to have all 3.
So it was all 3?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
You need 200 foot variance thing. That has nothing to do with building a house or anything. If you have a house, you do that within 200 feet of a stream.
So, as you asked, that's a really good question. Thank you. We need to take another look at the 200 foot setback because
I'm on a piece of property where I got this property in 2016 or whatever, I'm developing it. I have no houses or nothing on it right now.
Right.
But with your new rules and stuff, I no longer have a place to grow either. I just spent $20,000. You're telling me that I can't grow pot.
Thank you. We will take a look at that.
Well, what's your mediation fee? How can I correct this, or how do I mediate this?
We always look for a solution. And without looking at your site plan and your property, I would be talking out of complete ignorance
So
if
you
I...
can't come to you on a private basis or?
Absolutely. Give me a call, I'll be happy to look at it.
Okay, and then the other thing, I do think the gentleman said 3,000 square feet is really not enough to do the price structure now for anybody to make a living at. So all your talk is kind of,
We're not limiting anybody to 3,000 square feet.
well, you are, because you're imposing a lot of rules on people who want to, small farmers are supposed to be the small people that are trying to get along, or somebody doesn't want to grow, doesn't want to hire 20 people to work for them. Those people, they just want to keep it minimal. You're making it hard, you're imposing things on them that's not realistic.
Okay.
Okay, that's the next thing. And then the other thing too is the actual grow and what is grown are usually two different things. That mold or whatever, you guys want taxes on this stuff. And the other thing too, like I just said, I just lost a lot of area, because of the 1,600 form. But I'm still going to be charged for, 10,000, 5,000 square feet, whatever you decide, but isn't really what's happening. How do you mitigate that? Do you have a way for that? Do you have a way for doing that, mitigating that? Or can we change our form? Can we change our application? Can we modify it?
So one of the things that people are constantly doing, right up until we approve it, and even sometimes after we have the staff report written and have the approval written, is people are changing their applications.
Okay, so that's possible. Great. And then, yeah, I think the other thing too, just a comment, I think the county should minimize whatever the restrictions are, whatever the thing is, to the very minimum, because they're already being over-regulated by the state's going to regulate us, the water board's regulating us, we got Fish and Game regulating us, and we sure don't need the county making up things for us either. That's kind of the last thing. And then, how about the transportation permit to get the stuff out of the county? You said those would be, last time we talked to you, said those would be available to everybody, easy to get. Where do you get those at?
We're working on the permit and the new ordinance. Yep.
So right now, if I had to take my weed, let's say to LA, I could get
As a grower, you can transport it.
As a grower, so if I have a conditioner permit now, I can go load my car up with a box of weed and drive to LA?
Are you just being antagonistic? Or?
No, I'm not. I'm being really serious. This is something I'm thinking about doing. Is there some way I could do this now?
So as long as you're in the white market, yeah, you can do that now.
Okay, thank you.
Hello. Hi again. So I have a question real quick relating to the proposed cannabis tourism in the new draft ordinance. If a pre-existing applicant is interested in participating in cannabis tourism in one form or another, once the new draft ordinance is implemented, are they able to make an amendment to their existing permit if they're aligned with land use ordinance and so on and so forth?
Yes. Okay,
great. And I think one last thing, through this entire process, what I haven't seen is a baseline being developed for anything. We really, in terms of cultivation size or use or detrigation, there really isn't a baseline for anything. We hear small, big, large, egregious, detrimental. There's a lot of inflammatory language thrown around, but there's nothing to gauge it off of. And I was just wondering if that's something we can work on just so people know where they stand and where they fall in terms of this process, not only politically, but socially as well. It seems if we took, you said you have about 80 plus permits approved.
Yes.
Do you happen to know the average cultivation size?
For me to give you an average, it would vary too much. There's a couple that are 7 acres plus.
So
and
is it safe?
Many are in the under 10,000 square feet range.
Right, so there has to be an average at some point. Maybe that could be the baseline.
Yeah, no, we're starting to see some, we're starting to see, if you want to call it a baseline, it's a baseline, but we're starting to see some trends that are developing.
Okay, it's just good for usage because I think about even water usage we've thrown around. I know that the typical average farm, even now with scale, permitting is actually scaled up. even with that scaled up average, it's still significantly less than, you know, the standard domestic use for a single family residence in California. When you look at it, in other words, it would be nice to know whether something is good or bad.
Yeah, no, we look at that. It's interesting to look at the difference in water use statistics that people provide. It's interesting, and it's still extremely variable, in all honesty.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you all very much for being here tonight. This is an important part of the civic process, and it's helpful for us to sharpen our understanding of things, to hear from you. We, obviously, coming into tonight, had already thought about some changes, and there are things that we will go back and think more about before we get to the Planning Commission. I'm sure that Commissioner Morris and Supervisor Pennell will want to say some things too, but this is a really important part of the process, and it's a hard process. And sometimes it feels like, particularly the staff is antagonistic towards you, and I just want to assure you we're not. We may not come to the same conclusions that you come to, but one of the things that happens when you bring up the comments that you bring up is it helps us to think things through, and it helps us to be able to explain multiple sides of things to the decision makers. And it really is a critical part of this process, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you for your comments tonight. You certainly brought up a lot of points that we have not heard yet in our other meetings. And I do hear you loud and clear about the burdensome issues that some of these bring upon the small folks. And I think one of the issues, central points that I am keen on is we need to make sure that whatever we come up with in this ordinance has a carrot for a lot of folks out there. We're not going to beat everyone over the head with a stick and get them in. We're going to get a lot more in if we have a carrot. And so having a pathway to compliance, like the one lady said, is certainly something that we're keenly aware of, and it's something I'm going to focus on.
Yeah, and I would just like to say thank you very much for being here. I think it's important that both the planning director, staff, and planning commissioner, and myself hear from you. I would like to remind you that this is a huge change, and we're going to be able to establish baselines. I mean, there were figures made up that were referred to as scientific facts, and are not. They were made up by people who guessed how many gallons it took to water a plant and all those kind of things. We're going to find all that stuff out, and it won't take that long. But right now, I really appreciate so much being here in Garberville and seeing so many people who came through here who said they're in the process, because that was a very brave thing to do, to get in right there at the beginning and to put yourself through it. And I just appreciate it so much. And I hope you come away from this knowing that the county wants to work with you, wants to make this work, and that doing it together will be a lot more successful. So if you've got any rumors out there about what this one and that one is happening, I really want you to try to clarify it with us. And one final thing, because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, both in the cultivating and the non-cultivating community, about just who is permitted. Very, very few people are permitted right now. And there are a lot of people out there who act as if they're going through the process, and they're not. And they're emboldened, they're pretending, they're putting huge structures up there and nobody knows if they're permitted. Well, guess what? The county does. And so that's what you're going to see, as Director Ford said, is you are going to see that the county will in fact be making sure that people are permitted over time. And so I hope you have patience with us. I have a long vision that this will be a really good move for our environment, and I hope that everybody can make their way through it and have patience. So thank you very much.